Hi Sadaya, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interview you. Friends, here is Sadaya and let me introduce you more about her. Sadaya Zimmerel is an MSW and licensed clinical social worker who has worked with people with major mental health conditions in crisis and for the last 18 years in community mental health, providing intensive psychotherapy, rehabilitative skill building, assistance with access to crucial services, advocacy, and more. Emotional freedom techniques is a research proven to help with trauma, pain, anxiety, anger, stress, and more through over 120 peer reviewed articles and is recognized by the American Psychological Association as a beneficial therapy. Sadaya took continuing education in EFT and immediately found it clinically miraculous. She went on to pursue further study. She is now a certified accredited EFT practitioner and on a mission to increase access to EFT for everyone, including people with major mental health conditions and also their providers, for whom it may vastly increase their powers to help and their resilience. That's amazing. So, let us know more about EFT and its application on mental health issues through Sadaya herself. So, Sadaya, how did you get into EFT?
Well, I've been working my current job for 18 years as a clinical social worker, working with people with major mental health conditions. And because I'm working with some of the people with the most challenging conditions who are most likely to end up in the psychiatric hospital a lot and who are dealing with these difficulties all the time, I was continually looking for new ways to help them because the medication, although it's way better than it was 50 years ago, it still has its limits. There'd be people that would be on antidepressants but would still have some depression. People with bipolar episodes still had some breakthrough episodes, even if they were taking their meds as prescribed. And people with psychosis, they might be taking their antipsychotics as prescribed and beyond the maximum. They might be on Quazaril, which in our neck of the woods is one of the ones that is prescribed when nothing else works. Or and on a shot, they might be on three different antipsychotics, and everybody's doing the very best they can, but they might still have what we call residual psychosis, which is the kind of leftover psychosis. Um, and so it's very hard to live with leftover residual psychosis. People still in your head harassing you, hearing things, feeling like you're being pursued and people are after you all the time. I hear a slight echo after I speak. Are you hearing it as well? Residual psychosis is really a huge burden because people are hearing things in their head or they're having these strange experiences and they're having to constantly sort out what's real and what's not real. Maybe they believe it, maybe they don't believe it. Either way, it bothers them, you know. And so anyway, I was dealing with these limitations and with complex trauma as well. People with severe trauma who had abuse as children all the way on up as adults and who have kind of accumulative layer upon layer of trauma. And a lot of the traditional methods of trying to address that trauma, you can't even really touch it because as soon as you start to talk about it, they become overwhelmed and in pain and panic stricken, and you can't even go there. So, one of those classes that I would see every week for a couple hours, I have that luxury at my current job. I'm able to spend a lot of time with people if that makes a difference. I was working with her with Marshall Linehan's dialectical behavioral therapy, which is one of the gold standards of skill building for mastery of life. Communication, acceptance, meditation has a lot of components. It's a hybrid of different things. And she would work really earnestly and hard and work and try so hard. She was always overwhelmed, always miserable, always out cutting herself or burning. It was a very normal, regular thing for her to just be on the edge, right on the edge. So anyway, I had forgotten I had told her about this tapping workshop. It was a continuing education brochure that just showed up in my mailbox. Like a lot of other things, we get notices for all kinds of different stuff. And I always would clue into the ones that were kind of more holistic, that might be a slightly different approach, that might deal with the body as well as the brain. I'd already been really interested in the vagus nerve. Um, had attended a mindfulness, yoga, and radical self-acceptance workshop. So I
Yeah.
was clued into this stuff. But this one, I was really busy at work. I had to front the money to be reimbursed. I had to take out the time out of my schedule from all my clients, and it was hard to do. And I was like, maybe I'll just catch the next one. And she mentioned it. She's like, "Are you going to go to that thing that you told me about?" I'm like, "Oh no. If I told her about it, I had to go, honor bound, I had to go." So I went, and it blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind. One day, I mean, you know, to me, it was like, of course I'm going to run with this. Of course I'm going to run with this. So in the workshop, she gave us a whole bunch of great information on research, which was wonderful, and about all the amazing things that EFT does, which is the list is epic. I could only give you a tiny taste. I mean, it help if you think of the brain as having three parts, like a kind of a triune brain model, with the reptile brain at the bottom, fight, flight, or freeze, the limbic system, the mammalian brain, what we have in common with pets, right? And then and also the alert system, you know, letting us know if there's a fire. And then up here at the top, the prefrontal cortex, the purely human part of the brain where, you know, peace, serenity, choice, ideals, ethical thinking, everything we aspire to as humans, that's where that arrives. And how when people are in fight, flight, or freeze, all the blood gets shunted down to the reptile brain. And they don't have the equipment, they don't have the resources up there to even be able to access that, right? So, and what happens when somebody is super stressed out and in reptile brain? Oh, they lose their head. you know, the top part goes offline. It's not there. It's not available. And so one of the things that EFT does is it actually helps increase the connections to keep that part tamped down. And so that all the parts get to work more effectively together. And so people experience having more access to the higher regions of their brain, having more wisdom, more insight. We've always thought of this as mental health practitioners that we can't teach insight. We can't give that to, if people either have it or they don't. We can ask stimulating questions. We can try to elicit it to that for them by encouraging them to use their cognitive skills and think about things. But still, if somebody really believes that psychotic residual, that somebody really is trying to eat them, that there's nothing you could do up until now. There's a lot of things that I thought in 20 plus years. I've been 18 years at this job, but I actually, had worked other jobs before in mental health, that I thought there was nothing that could be done. I really honestly thought, and I would preach to people and counsel people acceptance so many times. The serenity prayer we have in the United States, we use that a
Yes.
lot. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, that wisdom has changed with EFT. That wisdom has changed.
Wow.
we have the cognitive triangle that we got from cognitive therapy, and that's the paradigm that we've been in for many, many years, which was revolutionary and is precious and is a great thing. Cognitive triangle is has to do with actions, thoughts, and feelings, right? And that any change in any one of those affects the others. So if you change what you do, it changes how you think and how you feel. If you change how you feel, it changes how you act and what you think. And if you change what you do, it changes how you feel and how you think, right? But we thought we could only change if we were going to do an intervention that barring throwing somebody in an ice bath, that we couldn't directly change how they feel. We would actually have to change what you do or how you think. Cognitive therapy is a lot about changing how you think, reframing, you know, um, taking out distortions, thinking about things different way, increasing your perspective, positive thinking, and making things more logical. Yes, that's all really wonderful. It can be a longer route, though, to changing feelings. And there's a lot of times in life where you might do everything you could do about it and think everything you can think about it and still feel crappy, still feel terrible. How many people say you have a friend who does something wrong to you, and you may have meditated about it, you may have prayed about it, you might have already talked with them, you understand that they made a mistake, they didn't mean to do it, but you still might not really feel like being around them. It still might make you want to just get away from that, right? Even though they're still a good person and you would really like to have their friendship, but you have this nasty aftertaste in your being, and how to get rid of that, right? Well, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually just get rid of it? If you really just could decide, I'm going to just get rid of this. Amazing power. Amazing power. The other thing is, like say you had something really terrible happen to you, a one-timer, like a car accident. And the natural way that that trauma would heal would be, for most people, they're going to think about that over and 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 over again. They're going to maybe have nightmares about it, right? They're going to be dreaming about it. They're going to be going through it again and again. They're going to talk to their friends about it. They're going to talk to their families about it. And after a while, the way we know it's pretty healed is when it becomes an old story, right? It becomes boring. It's no longer as interesting to even tell. It's like, yeah, I had a car accident. Yeah, whatever, I didn't enjoy it, but I've moved on, right? So that process can take anywhere from days, weeks, months, years for your average person to really age out. Well, EFT can expedite that. You can actually make it go so that instead of days and weeks and months, maybe you could crank through that thing in hours or days.
Wow, that's amazing, Sadaya.
Yeah, you have to be pretty painstaking and precise, in terms of you have to be specific and go for all the different little aspects, each piece at a time. You can't kind of try and do the whole global thing all at once. And so it takes patience and fortitude. But yeah, if you want to crank yourself through it and the reason it can do that it has that power, is because you are tapping into your electrical system, which we don't even really know a whole bunch about. In the West, we mostly use electricity in the human body, which is substantial, huge, a lot of volts of electricity in the human body. We mostly use it for tests. We know it exists, but we most like electrocardiograms, for example. But we've never tried to harness it. And yet people have actually been harnessing it, doing things both instinctually and as part of extensive systems, like in Chinese medicine with acupuncture. People have actually been dealing with this for centuries, have been using this. Um, EFT is a little different because it's actually a hybrid method. It's using those meridian electricity channels and acupressure for mental health and pain in conjunction with some of the best cognitive techniques from neurolinguistic programming and cognitive therapy, um, and exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is where you say someone has a phobia, or a severe anxiety about crossing the street. You might do little mini approximations to get them, across that street, starting with just thinking about crossing the street, then going outside and looking at the street. And, well, in regular exposure therapy, they're having to just weather that severe anxiety, and you try and make it bite-sized enough that they can get, and it start to wear off, where they get desensitized. But it's painful and painstaking because they have to go through it, right? Well, what EFT does is it massively takes the edge off so that you can do exposure therapy with way less of the pain and angst. That is because EFT, by tapping those points, it actually triggers the release of endogenous opioids. 3 different types: enkephalins, dynorphins, and endorphins, in a massive cascade. It also automatically flips someone into their parasympathetic nervous system. You can tell because they start yawning, they
Yeah.
start burping, there's they're going into out of fight, flight, and freeze and into rest and digest. So their bodily functions, they start, things start kind of moving and relax. Their neck might crack, they might stretch, all these things. And at the same time, what we were talking about of access to wisdom, the prefrontal cortex, of being able, they start having spontaneous insights, and more, things happen, that where they we call it 3 different types of shifts. There's cognitive shifts, which those new thoughts that they wouldn't have otherwise had, and there's emotional shifts because they're able to work through emotions much more easily and smoothly and quickly. They might uncover newer and newer, deeper layers. So it might start out as anger, but underneath that is sadness, and underneath that was actually some guilt, and so but it all happens much more quickly with EFT. So someone doing exposure therapy, what happens is, if you are going through a terrible fear, panic, but at the same time you're getting flooded with opioids, and at the same time you're being shunted over to your parasympathetic nervous system, it's kind of like, it's the spoonful of sugar making the medicine go down. You might, how are you going to be panic stricken when you're so relaxed? And at the same time, progress is being made, because what your amygdala is learning, actually saying, oh, well, if your amygdala puts the flags on things to let you know that they're a problem, that anything that looks like that is a problem, and it's the whole warning system. But it gets updated from EFT because it's like, oh, well, if we're so relaxed and we're having this wonderful experience, even while we're thinking about this noxious thing, maybe it's not so noxious. And so it updates it. So that can remove triggers. So triggers that might have been minefields, where somebody had something that would remind them of some trauma that they experienced in the past. Maybe they hear a firework and it reminds them of bombs in a war or whatever. Their amygdala getting trained is like, no, it's not a big deal anymore. It can actually update it with EFT. Yeah. Yeah. It also, the other thing is, by decreasing cortisol stress hormone, is a wonderful thing, because, we tend, in this modern age, we tend to live at a lot of us are running at some low level of stress hyperdrive on a regular basis, just from like email, because we're not running for miles and, hunting the buffalo, or, whatever we're doing to get that energy out of our system and through our system. And so we kind of accumulate it in our bodies. And when we have high levels when we're producing a lot of cortisol, the cortisol uses up the same building blocks that we need for DIA, a hormone involved in cell repair. If we use up all those building blocks for cortisol, we don't actually have the building blocks to use for good things that we need done with our body, you know? There's been all sorts of amazing science. There's also science around brain waves, and they did comparisons, between, they did a study comparing cognitive therapy and EFT, 6 sessions. And what they found was 6 months later, you could still tell the people that had had the EFT, their brain waves were still retained the normative, peaceful, happier, state of being 6 months later after 6 sessions. So much can be done. And then the other thing is that, I just lost a thought. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. Oh, I'll have to come back to that one. Yeah, and the other, heart rate variability. That's another sign of people being able to rise to the occasion and do what needs to be done when they need to do it, and then relax quickly. So if someone is not in so good shape, if they're not very resilient, and they're at higher risk really of all kinds of things, health problems, and if they have low heart rate variability, it means that when they get stressed, they get really stressed and they get stuck in stress, and it takes a long time for them to recover, right? And what you want is someone that's able to get stressed when there's an actual fire and then relax quickly afterwards and go back to baseline. So that's high heart rate variability. So EFT promotes high heart rate variability, and it does it, so it doesn't just do it in the moment when you're doing EFT, but it actually generalizes over. It spills over. So if you do EFT today and tomorrow and you don't do it for a week, it still might be helping you, is the amazing thing. So back to people with major mental health conditions. I mean, if anybody needs it, if anybody needs an extra tool that they can do when their therapist and psychiatrists are not around at any hour of the day or night,
Okay.
that is cheap, that is cheap. I mean, if you have a skilled practitioner working with you, they can help guide you and help you get deep into things and excavate and get through, things. They can help you move more thoroughly and deeply through things, with their skill and art, the more experienced and the more they have to offer in that regard. But the wonderful thing is there's no real limit on what a person can do with it by themselves either. You know, they really can make it their own. They can do what's comfortable to them. It's very forgiving if they're not completely in the exact point. They have to just be in the ballpark.
Yeah.
The points are the point. The tapping is really what does the work and the most important part. And so if they don't say the right words, there's really very little to worry about, and there's very little harm. I mean, the worst harm is if it just didn't really work that moment, that day, and it might be in that case that they didn't do it enough, or that they need to just get a little more specific and do a little more part, different angle or different way. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason why anybody in mental health wouldn't have this or wouldn't need this. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't need this. I think everybody needs this. If they really knew what it would do, everybody would want this. I mean, if there's a kind of before and after story, it's hard to remember how I lived before. you know I mean, I had a lot of other great things I did, but nothing like this, nothing as versatile as this, nothing that you can get away with doing in a staff meeting or you can do on a plane, or when you can't sing and you can't do sun salutations in the aisle, they won't let you. That you can and it's something that kind of can also make everything else easier and better. So it's been proven to, with research, it's been proven to help with performance. So athletes, before they are going to do anything athletic, if you do it before an interview, a job interview. Um, so back to mental health population. So people with chronic psychosis, we normally have options of trying to work with their, we try and turn down the volume with meds first. That's the most effective, important thing we can do. But a lot of times it doesn't work completely. Actually, a high percentage of people have at least one residual symptom, if not more, that they have to live with. And stress makes those symptoms worse. And a lot of them are, they have a high likelihood of having experienced trauma. And historically, we generally don't even deal with trauma for people with with psychotic conditions because we don't want to flare their symptoms and make them more psychotic and destabilize them. And so we normally we'll try to just stay in the present and not deal with anything from the past if we can avoid it, unless it bubbles up like a toxic burp and we have no choice. And then we'll try and do everything we can to push it back down. But that means that people end up having to live with trauma for years, their whole lives. And you know how it is, if you have unresolved trauma, it's like a little nasty capsule. It's like an abscess, and it just doesn't really go away. It can come out even when you have dementia later, and make you miserable then. So they leak. That's the thing about trauma capsules. So anyway, so I had clients when I had trained in EFT initially, I just ran with it. It was such a gift. It was such a boon. I was so excited. There nothing I had encountered in the entire 20 years was anything remotely like it in terms of power and what it could offer. And I taught it to every single client on my caseload as fast as I could. And and I told my clients too, I said, and I can help with trauma now. And they were ecstatic. I had clients like, really? When can we do with trauma? I know, I have something. I have something I want to do. And we were able, because the wonderful thing about EFT is it provides really gentle techniques, incremental ways. With that support of that acupressure makes all the difference. Um, and to be able to go through things and actually heal them, of just take off the charge, make it an old story, much more seamlessly and with far more ease and grace and far less pain. Yeah. So,
And Sadaya, let's discuss about, like, as you have explained about trauma, that is severe traumas.
mhm.
Like, some people have these delusions. They like, for example, in this schizophrenia, they might hear sounds, they might see something. So, could you please share some of your experiences of applying EFT on such cases?
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice alternative because normally with other methods, we are in a place of we have to decide whether how much certitude they have, how much do they believe it. If they're kind of half and half, if they're not completely sure, that there's a rod in their head, then you can go, okay, well, would it help you to know what I think? Or can you think of any other possibilities of why you might be having this sensation? You can psychoeducate them. You can tell them how schizophrenia and symptoms work, that might just be their symptoms talking, that symptoms play out in a number of ways. They can give you a somatic experience. They can tell you things that aren't true. We say, don't believe everything you think, right? Very important as a human. Don't believe everything you think. And so we can work with them that way if we have the good relationship, the good rapport, and they're not at 100% certitude. If they're at 100% certitude, if they absolutely believe that they have that rod in their head, or that someone's doing something to them bad
Someone
while they're
is
sleeping.
saying something.
Yeah, that their roommate is saying they want to kill them, which is
Yeah.
very It's very difficult to live with a roommate if you really 100% believe that. Um, well, then it's very tricky because you can't just say they're wrong, because then they just feel promptly invalidated and like you're not listening, you're not taking them seriously, and nobody likes that. Nobody, there's no human being in the world that likes, if they're trying to tell somebody something important, to just have them write it off and not hear them. And they get told, in this population, they get told they're wrong all the time, So some of them are kind of like, just kind of resigned to it to some degree. I mean, they're probably not as upset about it as a less experienced person would be, if they're older, if they're young, but anyway. Um, but the wonderful thing about EFT is that it gives a different alternative, because you can use the client's words, and because without challenging them, you can, you know, I know that you're this is really difficult for you. You can validate the feelings. This is really painful and difficult for you. Would you be willing to do something with me that might at least turn down the stress around this?
Okay.
Yeah. Would you at least be able to, can we do something? Because I mean, another thing is ask them, is there anything I can do? Is there anything, you can do about this? Sometimes the tricky thing with psychosis is you may not want to do what they think you should do about it,
Yes.
because if you know that, you know there are no bugs in somebody's house, you're not going to want to take them to buy a whole bunch of smoke bombs to start to start bombing them. So some of that can be tricky too, and you have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that, but can I at least try and help you with some of the stress, and maybe we'll have some new ideas about how to cope with it too,
Yes.
if we can get the stress down, because it's easier to problem solve when you're not living with stress. They have the same challenge that anybody else would have, is that sometimes we think, because a situation is horrible and awful, that we should and have to feel horrible and awful about it. So the idea of saying, hey, let's feel a little less awful about it can be really alien, and that can take a little negotiation. But I can also, sometimes I also use my own experience, and I say, oh my gosh, hearing about this is really stressing me out. I need to do something for my stress. Would you want to do this with me? And and say, let's just do this together for a moment. The wonderful thing about EFT is once they get started tapping, they start to see what it can do for them. And they can also learn that it's okay to be concerned about a situation, it's okay to believe in a situation, and still not have to be super stressed about it. But the other thing is, because of that because of the working of the brain altogether and accessing wisdom, they are able sometimes to have more insights that can decrease their certitude about delusions, is what I've observed. Because sometimes by the end of tapping, they're like, hmm, you say, well, how is this for you, that this rod in your head, or that the people your roommate is saying they hate you, and they might say, I don't think he's really saying that anymore,
Mhm. Wow,
or
amazing.
I think he might say that sometime, but maybe he was just having a bad day. I mean, they'll come up with their own explanations or ideas, and what's really happening is the stress is decreasing, and so there's more information flow, and they're able to process more. Because as we know, in psychosis, there's usually a whole bunch of conclusions happening all at once, because it's kind of an overstimulation of the brain, with a lot of neurons firing, and a lot of conclusions being drawn under duress. And we all do not do our best thinking and sorting when we're stressed. That's just not the time we do it. And so by giving them that added support of their nervous system being in a better state, it actually helps them to manage their symptoms more. And just like symptoms go up and flare with increased stress, they tend to go down with decreased stress. And so it's easier to live. It's easier to be comfortable.
How about,
I had a client, sometimes it's, huh?
yeah, yeah, please tell about the case study you are about to
Sometimes
tell.
it's really important to be very, very flexible, because sometimes between the short attention span, if someone's having a lot of psychosis, it's like having a whole bunch of people talking and interrupting all the time, and it's hard to focus. And they also might be kind of initially a little suspicious or anxious about something. And so, what I found is it's so important to keep offering it, in a nice and gentle, persistent way of saying, oh, I had a client, I had done the tapping with her, and she had found it very helpful, but then it started to get anxious and paranoid about it, and so back off, right? But then later on I was like, I showed her finger points. I said, I have another thing that might really help you, and it's nice to really give them the opportunity to say yes. Can I tell you about it?
Mhm.
Would you like to hear about something that I found really helpful for me with that when I get stressed? And I showed her squeezing finger points with breathing, and that was amazing. There were a lot of nights that's what got her through. She'd wake up in the middle of the night in a rage, paranoid rage, thinking that people were molesting her while she was sleeping, and nobody was listening and nobody would do anything about it, and just frustrated and angry and could not sleep. And she started just squeezing those finger points and breathing, and she'd be able to go back to sleep. you know she'd have to do it several times a night, but it made a huge difference. And I think having that power, that so often our clients think that only something external, just only that taking their meds or going to the hospital, that there's so limited options. To have such a powerful tool at their own fingertips, literally, is a beautiful thing.
Awesome. And like usually for this bipolar, people say there is nothing that can be done because of their extreme behaviors. So could you please share something about
So
application of EFT for bipolar?
yeah. Well, I have ended up I have a client who has a very brittle condition. He
Mhm.
has both the typical thing of wanting to not have to take meds and always trying to taper down or have his doctor titrate down as low as possible, then sometimes losing the game and ending up having an episode. And also he has a really brittle condition. A lot of it's just not the case. A lot of people that, even though they take their meds as prescribed, they might still have episodes, um, which is very unfortunate. And then he has, so I've helped him. He's asked me, actually. I remember I had taken him to the emergency room because he was really manic. He thought he was really unsafe, and he was trying not to get picked up by the police, and had decided he would go to the emergency room. Yeah, so I was telling about my client who's bipolar, one of them, who has really found EFT particularly helpful.
Mhm.
He was in the midst of an episode, and I had taken him to the hospital, to the ER, because he wanted to go. He was feeling unsafe, like if he walked in the street, he would get picked up by the police. And he was really labile, the kind of thing where he's going from, laughing, then really angry, and in a matter of seconds. And in the ER, I think it would have been a very hard stay in the ER while we were waiting in the emergency room to be seen. Because of, on the one hand, the grandiose effusion, he was trying to feed everybody food. He was trying to give them all, everybody in the lobby, and everybody wanting him to stay away from them, but he's being so sweet and nice, but then he's crying, and then he's laughing, and then he's angry. But he asked, because I had taught him EFT before, he's like, could you do EFT with me? And immediately helped him calm down and stay seated and wait. We tapped and tapped, and people are looking at us. I don't care.
Yeah,
That
how does
I do not care at all.
yes.
but we just tapped and tapped, and he was able to wait and be more relax, even though he's still having the mood lability going through his body. He wasn't as reactive, and wasn't having to act on it the same way. And so that's amazing to have something like that, to help someone. And because I had taught it to him before, he knew what it could do, and he knew it might help him, and he knew it was kind of out of control. And so he was able to get through the process much more easily. He's also someone that afterwards, see, a lot of times when someone's bipolar, they accumulate a kind of bipolar trauma from the aftermath of episodes, the accumulative experiences. Once they learn about things that they've done that were really embarrassing, things they've said on social media, or, in this case, he had gone to the big city, and he'd had a sexual misadventure he had not remotely planned on, and was contrary to his orientation, and was extremely embarrassing to him, painful and humiliating. And normally, there wouldn't have in the past there wouldn't have been much I could do about it except just listen. I would have listened. I think it would have even been hard for him to even, because of the enormity of feeling awful feelings he had around it. We probably would have been talking about it in little snippets over years, I'm thinking. It probably, yeah, because it was so bad. But in his case, instead, in one session, we were able to get through a lot with EFT. We just took each little thing. I'd use his words about what happened, each little piece. He said this, and, each little, went through it, and, tapping hard, many, many, many rounds. But at the end of it, he was like, oh, felt better. And the thing about it, when he'd first come into that session, he felt suicidal over it. He didn't want to live anymore because of it. And at the end, to have that amount of relief, and been like, okay, he still, once in a while, he'll tell me, I think there's still a little bit of stuff left over from that thing, and I'm like, let's tap. We'll work on what is it? Let's work on it. But yeah, such a difference in terms of how much suffering, greatly reduce the suffering.
Could you please any case studies about trauma, abuse? Because these
Oh,
days
there's
we keep
tons.
hearing a lot of abuse cases by father, by brother, or
Yeah.
by someone close relative, and these girls could not express or tell their parents, and still
Hmm.
that bothers them. It impacts their
Hmm.
marital life, where they are
Hmm.
still not able to open up to their partner. So abusive
Oh,
cases have they go
oh
through a
yeah,
lot.
that's
Yeah,
wonderful stuff to work on. It
yeah.
is, it's not wonderful stuff, but it's wonderful stuff to work on with EFT, because EFT is such a powerful tool. It's just quite miraculous. You can, it makes it so much safer to talk about difficult things, especially once someone knows how soothing and comforting the tapping can be to support them. And then if they have someone tapping with them, that added layer of support, they can get a lot of healing done in a very short period of time, potentially. Now, I have a client who has cumulative, complex trauma, layer upon layer. She had the just tremendous abuse as a child, and then as an adult. And previously, prior to EFT, we could we really couldn't talk about it at all, because if we started to talk about it, she wanted to hurt herself. Because pain actually can shut off emotional pain. Physical pain can actually shut off emotional pain. And so a lot of people that cut or burn, it really is something that can work. That's why they do it. Wonderful thing is EFT works. EFT works. And
Without having to self harm themselves. That
exactly, exactly.
okay,
And the other thing is that it can be transformative.
okay.
So it
So
can, so someone, say they were abused,
Mhm.
in a severe way, if they were to talk about it, there's the risk of waking all those memories and
Memories. Yeah.
associations up.
Mm.
It's like a frozen capsule, and you open it up and you get flooded. It's as if it's happening now. It never got digested because trauma memories are recorded differently, and they're not in a digested, processed way. And so it can just be like falling into a hole, you know. And and I'd say with my client, this one in particular, if we ever did try to talk about it, it actually would go into her body and she'd be in pain. It would statize. So she'd be and if somebody's in pain, you can't talk anymore about it. And then what do? How do you end a session? They're in pain now. Hello, you shouldn't have brought it up. you know? And so the wonderful thing about EFT is it provides for what to do when something goes into your. Oh, you can tap on what's going on in the body. It can totally relieve and remove the pain. And then you can get back and do a little bit of work with the trauma again. And it's important to pace things how someone wants to go, but you can also, EFT provides a whole bunch of different layers in terms of the gentle techniques for how far away and distant, and to go. So we have the tell the story technique where you might just, the moment people even think about that little story, that snapshot of nasty trauma that came up, they might be like, oh no, I can't deal with that. No, no, no. Well, you can tap on that. Even though I can't deal with that, I deeply and completely accept myself, even though I can't deal with that. And you can tap on that, and the subjective units of distress of that can go way down, and then you can get in a little closer. And so you can get work done that you couldn't actually otherwise do with trauma. And also, the other great benefit is that at the end of your session working on trauma, when that person goes home and something starts to come up, they can tap on their own for it, which is something
Exactly.
EMDR does not offer, right? So they can do their own homework, they can do their own little booster shots, when anything's starting to leak or starting to nip, they have, and so they're inherently more empowered. We also have the TTT, trauma tapping technique, which is wordless tapping. There's a beautiful cartoon, self trauma. You can trauma tapping tapping for trauma cartoon. You can Google and you'll find it. And the nice thing is that it doesn't matter how old you are. Children can do this. Elderly people can do this. You don't even have to. You don't even have to believe in it for it to work. It is not reliant on the placebo effect either. You know, um, my husband absolutely does not believe in it at all, but he likes being touched. So I try to tap on his points every day. And now he's actually trained. He won't ever admit it, but as soon as I start to do his points, he already relaxes
Yes.
because his
It's like
body
a
already
nice
associates
massage.
what it
Nice.
will do to him. Yes, his body already knows. If he wants to argue, if he's angry about something, I was like, okay, I'll listen as long as I can touch on your points. He's just like, okay, so I touch on his points. Well, he can't keep it up. He can't stay angry as well. So it's an incredibly versatile tool. It's incredibly useful. And as I said, everybody should have it. There's just not a single human being on the planet that wouldn't benefit, you know? Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Sadaya. Because
Welcome.
this coming from a, professional,
Mm-hmm.
therapist who is who is proficient in psychotherapy is
Mm-hmm.
recommending EFT matters a
Mm-hmm.
lot. So,
It's like it's kind of like growing. Oh, internet stable. Sorry about that. It's like growing. For me as a clinician, it was like growing extra arms.
yeah,
There was a way in which I always felt helpless or like I wish there was more I could do, and it stopped when I got EFT. there's still limitations, there's still poverty, there's still all kinds of stuff we deal with the system. There's all kinds of ways we can't help that we wish we could help. But this extended my powers of being able to help so exponentially that I it just has made me just so much more excited for my work all anew and excited to share with other clinicians and other clinicians who I've shared with and trained in it. They already feel the same way too. They already know. They're like, oh my gosh. So
You
this
are
is
doing
kind
such
of
a
what we were
great job.
dreaming of. What we were dreaming of. Yeah, I remember, I have a psychiatrist I work with who she picked up on how what it could do from a client, and she was having a really rough day. She came and asked if I would do it with her,
The
and I
psychiatrist
and I
comes to you to
did. Yeah, yeah, and it was and
amazing.
it was very helpful to her, and she uses it now. Um, you know, yeah, every clinician would want this in their toolkit if they knew what it could do. There's nobody who wouldn't want it because it really is life-saving and precious.
It's weird, it's simple, and it's
Hmm.
powerful.
Yeah, and people can teach their loved ones. I've had a client who taught her daughter and her grandchild, you know.
Thank you very much, Sadaya, because uh, different people have been interviewed. I was just longing for to interview one of the clinician who has actually applied with
Hmm.
severe mental health issues and
Hmm.
stress. And I would love to have more and more interviews with you so that like people can hear and get benefited.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
thank you very much. And
Oh,
uh,
pleasure.
what's your message to psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, or any mental health professionals
Hmm.
who are no doubt CBT or REBT or acceptance and commitment therapy or DBT? There you say how EFT can help them to
Okay.
produce better results
Yeah.
to their
I would
patients.
say it's the ultimate method and it's the ultimate complementary method. There is no therapy that you do that this would not make better. What happens is once you have EFT, anything you might try and work with someone in terms of cognitive therapy, you'll be able to get farther, go farther, teach them more, help them more with cognitive therapy once you have EFT, because with EFT you can actually train their nervous system and help them be a more receptive learning space of mind to be able to do the therapy you want to do with them. So
Thank
there's no therapy that is that this would not make it better.
you.
Make it work better and make it easier and make the results be longer lasting as well.
Wow.
Yeah, if you're a mental health if you're a mental health professional, you want this tool. And it should be everywhere. It should be in every psychiatric hospital. It should be in the prisons. It should be in schools. Every human being would do better, better, and have an easier time making good decisions if they had this.
Thank you very much, Sadaya, for your
Thank
wonderful
you.
message and interview. Thank you.
Thank you.